and welcome to India's World. Myanmar is all set to choose its president this week. The presidential election comes 4 months after a general election which was held on November 8th last year. In that election, the National League for Democracy, led by Aung San Suu Kyi, won the absolute majority in parliament. Under Myanmar's indirect presidential election system, the parliament is expected to choose a president and 2 vice presidents. Aung San Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy has a majority of about 60% in both houses of parliament. This means that its 2 candidates are certain to be elected president and vice president. The other vice president will be a candidate chosen by the military. This is just one of the ways in which the military has guaranteed itself a role in government when it created Myanmar's current constitution. Aung San Suu Kyi has not been allowed to contest for the post of president despite long negotiations with the army to change the constitutional provisions which bar her from contesting. However, she has said she would be above the president in the new dispensation. To discuss the presidential election in Myanmar, we have with us 3 distinguished experts. We have with us Ambassador Preet Malik, a distinguished diplomat. He has been India's ambassador to Cuba, Bahrain, Tanzania and Myanmar. Ambassador Vivek Katju, another eminent diplomat. He has been India's ambassador to Afghanistan, Thailand and Myanmar. And we have with us Professor Ghosal. He is an expert on Myanmar. He was a professor of Southeast Asia and Southwest Pacific Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University. He has been associated with several think tanks, including Center for Policy Research, Institute for Peace and Conflict Studies, and Society for Indian Ocean Studies. I welcome you, gentlemen, to this discussion. Ambassador Malik, let me begin with you. Tell our viewers why Aung San Suu Kyi, a Nobel laureate who spent 15 years of the 21-year military rule in Myanmar in prison, is unable to contest for president of a country.
Well, it's very straightforward. Under the 2008 Constitution, anybody who is either married to a foreign national or has children who own foreign nationality is not qualified to be elected as president or vice president of the country. This is a constitutional provision.
What is the thinking behind this kind of provision?
Well, it's very specifically directed at her. The whole idea during the last, you referred to the military rule of the past 21 or 22 years. As you know, actually military rule started in 1962. Yeah. Now, Aung San Suu Kyi, when she came back to what was Burma then and became Myanmar, was very clearly seen as a threat by the army as she could take over. To some extent, this got quantified because the 1990 elections, which were free at that and fair at that time, she and her party won 82% of the seats. At that time, there was no constitution that was valid as such. The previous constitution of 1974, for all practical reasons, had been thrown into the waste paper basket. So they felt that she posed a direct threat to them. And because she was married to a British national, they ensured in the constitution a provision that she would not be able to stand for executive posts.
Okay.
Incidentally, just as an aside, let's not forget that their citizenship law also has the same provisions, or at least had the same provisions in the past.
Okay, Vivek, after all, there's been a thaw between the National League for Democracy and the military, as it were, and the military-backed government of President Thein Sein. So why has Aung San Suu Kyi not been able to convince the military to change the constitution so that she could contest? After all, these negotiations have been going on for the last 2 or 3 months.
You are right. She's tried her best. And I think her foreign supporters, too, have drummed up support. And if you see the foreign media, there is a great deal of disappointment that the army hasn't agreed to changing the constitution. But what she tried to was a little odd. She wanted that particular provision or the article of the constitution, I think it's 59F, to be suspended. Now, that itself is, as one newspaper, one foreign commentator put it, a little dubious. The reason for that is simple. I don't think the military wants her as president. And to some extent, she already knew this, and she had accepted the compromise, because the 2008 constitution itself is a product of a compromise where the army says that, okay, we will relinquish power, but we are a very substantial political presence and we will continue to be that presence. So they are being rigid, and the implications of this, of course, we can discuss.
Yeah, we will be discussing this. Professor Ghosal, tell us, what is the process of electing the president and the vice president in two vice presidents in Myanmar?
I think the process is again defined by the constitution, that whichever party that occupies the majority have a role to nominate their own candidates, along with other ethnic parties and all that. So in such case, obviously, since Aung San Suu Kyi got the largest majority, obviously the task was given to her.
Don't the two houses nominate candidates for president?
Right. That's right.
But then they meet together and then they elect one person as president and two as vice president.
That's right. That's right.
So not only would NLD nominate its presidential candidate, would the Union Solidarity and Democracy Party, or USDP it's called, would they also nominate?
Now, in this case, I think their numbers are quite low. Okay. So they would not have any role in this.
No, I think it should be clarified. Yeah. You have three entities that under the Constitution can nominate vice presidential candidates.
Okay.
The upper house has one, the lower house has one, and the military has one. Right. That is the system. So you get these three, and then the electoral college decides which one of them will be elected as president of the three, and the other two remain as vice president.
Okay, all right. So we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this discussion in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing the presidential election in Myanmar. Vivek, so you were saying that the Union Solidarity and Development Party will also nominate, but each house chooses one candidate.
Chooses a candidate, and then they meet and to decide, and then the winner and the two who get the number 2 and 3 become the vice president.
Okay, but the question I really want to ask you was, why has Aung San Suu Kyi chosen Mr. Tin Chaw as a presidential candidate when he was not even a member of a party till 2 months ago? And do you think the international media is being unfair to him by calling him Aung San Suu Kyi's driver?
No, actually, I think there's a lot of confusion. He is a very qualified person. He himself, there is some confusion about his actual sort of CV. But he was educated in Burma, in Myanmar.
He went to school with Aung San Suu Kyi.
He went to school with. He's a professor. He's been a government official, and he has travelled abroad and
he wasn't a member of the party.
But I think that's not important. I think he was a very close aide of Aung San Suu Kyi, both he and his wife. So I think the important thing here is that he is qualified, but more than that, he trusts him completely.
Yeah. Well, just to add that his father was a secretary of the NLD. His wife is an NLD member of parliament. So I think it's unfair to actually call him Aung San Suu Kyi's driver.
No, but that's exactly what I'm saying. That he may have driven her once or twice.
He was driving her around.
But that
was not as a driver, as an aide, as a friend, and a close friend.
I think in India, when somebody refers someone as driver, the meaning is a little different from what you see in Southeast Asian context. Sometimes the drivers are not considered to be someone inferior or something. I've seen, very senior people, even the ministers, going to the restaurant in Indonesia or in Malaysia, and the driver sits in the same table and eat with them.
Okay, but what I wanted to ask you was this. Do you see the same kind of hierarchy in Myanmar that we saw in India with Manmohan Singh and Sonia Gandhi, that we saw in Thailand with Yingluck Shinawatra and Thaksin Shinawatra?
No, I think one has to understand the dynamics of military rule in order to understand what is going to happen and what is happening today. I think you put a question that why was it that she was barred from assuming the position of the president? I think the army drafted a constitution where it wanted to sustain its corporate interests. And they didn't want, until the time army feels comfortable, to allow the democratic process to take its own course.
Yeah.
It had to be a guided democracy. There were two reasons why it didn't want. One was to maintain its corporate interest, and the second thing, the army was afraid that its human rights question could come up, and if she takes over, then they might be put into some kind of a sort of trial or something.
Yeah.
So they assured their position, and they didn't want anybody to assume the real authority.
Okay. Vivek, do you think the new president will merely be a puppet of Aung San Suu Kyi, or do you think he will come into his own once he becomes president? And recognizing this, Aung San Suu Kyi would assume a new title, a new role, because people are saying she could become prime minister, although the constitution doesn't say that there will be a prime minister, but it also doesn't say there will not be a prime minister. Others are saying that she might become the foreign minister so that she can sit on the National Security and Development Council.
No, I think the prime minister is unlikely, because unless there is a specific provision for a prime minister, you can't have. But this foreign minister thing too, I think it's unlikely. I think she will remain out. You asked whether it will be a diarchy.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to say how this whole situation will pan out. I think it's impossible. To begin with, of course, she will exercise all power.
No, she said so.
Yes,
When
she said I'll be above
the
the constitution. At the end of the day, she is the acknowledged leader of the country as of now. And what will have to be achieved is a modus vivendi between her and the army chief, the supreme commander of the armed forces. Without that modus vivendi being reached, this system will not work.
Okay,
and therefore, just one last sentence, therefore, the question of what will be the relationship between Aung San Suu Kyi and the incoming president is to my mind important, but it is far less important than the earlier thing of the equation between the army chief and Aung San Suu Kyi.
Ambassador Malik, as Vivek said, without the army's cooperation, Aung San Suu Kyi cannot have a formal role or even a semi-formal role of running the government. So what kind of arrangement could it be, and why should the army agree to it?
Well, let's put it this way. Why did the army even decide that there could be a civilian government?
Oh, there are a variety of reasons.
No, it's for obvious reasons. One, that they wanted to bring in the rest of the world to balance off the relationship with China.
Absolutely.
So that remains. It's a live issue. So to that extent, there will be various areas where they will not have any problem with Suu Kyi being and her party being in control. On top of it, they control defense, they control home, they control border security, where you therefore find that any government outside that system will be somewhat limited. And this is the role that the army is going to play. It's not merely a case of safeguarding their own interests. It's an issue of what does the army believe in? They believe that the security and sovereignty of the nation has to be secured by them, and it's provided for in that context within the 2008.
Okay, quickly.
No, sir, I foresee difficulties. For example, on the Rohingya question, Aung San Suu Kyi will now receive, and the civilian government will receive a lot of flack, but the army and the Sangh will be unmoving. Now, how will she balance this? Similarly, on the ethnic issue, again there will be pressure. So therefore, unless there is a modus vivendi which is achieved between the army and she, the official apparatus is will be under her. I don't see how this will pan out.
Well, she'll get blamed.
Yes, that's
undoubtedly. But at the same time, I don't see how they can prevent her from at least fulfilling some of the areas of the promise that she's held out to the people. Otherwise, there will be general unrest. And the ethnic minorities issue is a separate factor.
We're going to take that up in a bit, but we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back with you in a bit. Stay with us. Don't go away. Welcome back. We are discussing the presidential election in Myanmar, which also involves electing 2 vice presidents. So Professor Ghosal, the NLD's nominee from the upper house, who's likely to become the vice president, is a Chin ethnic Christian, Henry Van Theo. Now, do you think that a Chin becoming, a non-Buddhist becoming a vice president will help her in any way to deal with the ethnic conflicts raging in Myanmar?
Partially. But I think she will face a lot of problems in handling with the ethnic issues. Aung San Suu Kyi is a very pragmatic person. I think the very fact that in 2010 she decided to meet the president is an indication that she has more or less accepted the kind of framework that is going to emerge in Myanmar. And that's why, to my mind, she has not really made any major statement on the question of the Rohingyas, the question of national unity and other things. But then there are internal pressures from within. So she has to also face that kind of internal challenges. So the ethnic issue will be one. I think there are other challenges also she will have to face, apart from balancing the role with the military. I think within her own party. Because at the moment, the party is dominated by people above 69 or 70.
No second-rank leadership has been
developed. The younger generation, although has not really openly come out against her, but at least there are voices emerging. And every time I talk to somebody in Myanmar, they talk about this, the aspirations of the younger generation. So she has to also take into account that problem.
But coming back to the presidential election, the military also has a nominee. They've nominated a former general, Mint Sue, who was the chief minister of the Yangon region. Now, he is somebody who has a reputation of cracking down on democratic movements. In 2007, he played a particularly dubious role when a democracy movement was being led by monks in sort of attacking the protesters. So, what kind of signal is the military sending by nominating such a person for vice presidency?
I think they're sending a hardline signal. It is in consonance with the decision they've taken not to bend on Article 59F. It is part of that. But the interesting thing is to see is whether this gentleman will evolve. It's one thing to be a military leader. It's quite another thing to sit in the chair of the vice president in a new civilian sort of dispensation. And permit me to make one point of a general nature here, Bharat. I think the army has been short-sighted. Despite their hard feelings for Aung San Suu Kyi, they should have allowed her to become the president. Because as it is working, the military-civilian diarchy, the military NLD diarchy would be difficult enough. As Ambassador Malik said, the fact is that the security apparatus will be entirely with the army. That itself will cause a problem. But to add this additional problem of Aung San Suu Kyi being outside the system and controlling the apparatus is an unnecessary problem.
Fair enough. But again, on the army's nominee, Vivek says that we'd like to see whether this gentleman evolves as vice president. But the fact is that Myanmar's army's generals, even at ripe old age of 70 and 80, have evolved. And one such person was who actually started this transition, General Than Shwe. He chose the current president. He could have chosen a more hardline president like Thuraman Shwe, but he chose Thein Sein, despite the fact that he had a heart problem. So he was a man with a certain kind of vision of a transition to democracy. Now, this Mint Sue, the vice presidential nominee of the army, was a close aide of General Than Shwe. Now, my question to you is that will he evolve like Than Shwe? And does it mean that General Thanshui still has a tremendous amount of influence in the army?
Let me start with the second part of your question. It's pretty obvious that Thanshui still is exercising influence. And as you rightly pointed out, he was a close aide of Thanshui. So to that extent, one can expect that he would be carrying out some of the, let's say, major areas that Thanshui wants to see put forward. But I wouldn't rule out the possibility, as Vivek has also pointed out, that when he is actually exercising authority and knowing full well that his position and that of the armed forces is not in any question whatsoever, he may evolve into a more pragmatic person. The real problem that I foresee is, even though Suchi may say that she'll be above the president and would in effect exercise control, as you know, under the constitution, if she's not a member of the national, what's it called?
Security and
Development Council, and she can only be a member of that either if she's a relevant cabinet minister or she's the president.
Or she can be an invitee also. There's a provision for having invitees.
Yeah, but you see, if you look at the structure of that
it's dominated by the military.
They would find, if they don't want her there, they can easily stop it.
Yeah.
So, how is she really going to exercise authority?
Yeah.
And will she not have to rely more and more, even though it might be a nominated kind of president who would listen to her? Wouldn't there be enough periods of time when he will have to take decisions?
Yeah, absolutely. So my last question, really, we are running out of time. So quickly, both of you, if you would answer it in one line. So we have a situation where you'll have a proxy president, then you will have the puppet master, Aung San Suu Kyi, who will be trying to control the president, and then you have the army, which will be trying to control both of them. So when will army's influence really go down? How much time? When will army feel confident that there can be a full transition to democracy, that they don't need to nominate ministers for home, defense, border security, that civilians are good enough to do that?
No time soon. I think if you plot the course of the Myanmar army, it has made a transition. I'll share this with you first. I was there in 2000.
But quickly.
Very.
Yeah.
I was there in 2001. And in 2001, if you'd asked me that 15 years down the road, all this would happen, I would have been skeptical, because the army was not in a relenting mood at all. So it has made a transition. The next transition is really going to be very difficult for them. You take one more sentence.
No, we're running out of time. We're running out. Yeah, Professor Ghosal.
I think one has to take into account the experience of Indonesian military. They left politics only when they found their economic interests were secured. And when the children of the army decided not to join the army anymore because there are opportunities for their jobs in corporate sector.
Okay.
I think in Myanmar, things will also change another 10 years' time, when the economy is going to change and the economy would be large enough so that the army doesn't stick completely, to the power and holding its economic interests.
Okay, so you're saying that Vivek will be surprised once again?
Yeah.
No, 10 years is 10 years.
All right.
No time soon, I say.
Right.
All right.
This is not going to happen for the next 25
All
years.
right. Okay. We've run out of time. I'd like to thank all of you, Professor Ghosal, Ambassador Vivek, Katju, Ambassador Preet, Malik, for participating in this discussion. Thank you very much for coming here. That's all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching India's World. I